Good afternoon, students. So now we're going to be doing chapter 19 of the Azar book, in which we're going to talk about connectives, more about conjunctions, connectives, and dependent clauses and all that kind of fun stuff. So in chapter 19, we're going to talk about connectives that express cause and effect, contrast, and condition. So we are continuing our chapter on adverb clauses. So using because of and due to, consequently, therefore, so that, and other connectives that connect sentences together. Because the weather was cold, we stayed home. Because introduces an adverb clause. It is followed by a subject and a verb. So because the weather was cold, so here you have the subject and then you have the verb. So this is a clause. Then you can also say, because of the cold weather, we stayed home. Now here you have a group of words with no subject and no verb. So therefore you have an adverb phrase. So because of the cold weather, we stayed home has the same exact meaning as because the weather was cold, we stayed home. Due to the cold weather, we stayed home. So these are all different ways of saying because. So that way, in your paper, you don't have to keep saying because. So therefore, you can say because the weather was cold, or because of the cold weather, or due to the cold weather. And you can also say due to the fact that the weather was cold, we stayed home. And so in all of these examples, the dependent clause or the prepositional phrase is in the front of the sentence. Therefore, you need to have a comma. So if you say because the weather was cold, comma, we stayed home. Because of the cold weather, in which you have an adverb phrase, you still have a comma. So if the adverb phrase or the dependent clause is in the beginning of the sentence, we put a comma. Due to the cold weather, comma, we stayed home. If the dependent clause or the dependent phrase is at the end of the sentence, we don't need a comma. We stayed home, no comma, because of the cold weather. We stayed home, no comma, due to the cold weather. We stayed home, no comma, due to the fact that the weather was cold. So it's used exactly, the adverb phrase and the cause and effect adverb phrase and the cause and effect adverb clause have the same meaning, and they all mean the same thing. They show cause and effect. The only difference is in sentence structure. So if I say, because the weather was cold, we stayed home. Here you have a dependent clause with an independent clause. That makes a complex sentence. And then if I change it and I say, because of the cold weather, we stayed home, that becomes a simple sentence, because you end up with a phrase, subject, verb, object. So that is a simple sentence. There's no reducing, okay? Because we only reduce things when you have a to-be verb, or you have a verb and you have two things that are the same subject. And here you have two things, two different subjects. So we're not trying to reduce an adverb phrase, adverb clause into an adverb phrase. That only happens if you have the same subject. Here you have two different subjects, so that's not going to work. So let's see. So they're all different ways of saying because. You have because of, due to, and due to the fact that. Using transitions to show cause and effect, therefore and consequently. Al failed the test because he didn't study. Al didn't study, therefore he failed the test. Al didn't study, consequently he failed the test. Al didn't study, therefore he failed the test. He therefore failed the test. He failed the test, therefore. All of these have the same meaning. And so the difference between a transition word, also known as a conjunctive adverb, a transition word and an adverb clause is that when you have a transition word, you have two sentences of equal importance. So why does that sound familiar? It's just like when you had your coordinating conjunctions. So that the transition word acts like a coordinating conjunction that connects two independent clauses together. However, the difference between a coordinating conjunction and a transition word is that the transition word gives more emphasis to that sentence. So, Al failed the test because he didn't study. A, B, and C have the same meaning. Therefore, and consequently, mean as a result. In grammar, they are called transitions or conjunctive adverbs. Transitions connect the ideas between two sentences. Al didn't study, therefore he failed the test. A transition occurred in the second of two related sentences. Notice the patterns and punctuation in the examples. A period, not a comma, is used at the end of the first sentence. The transition has several positions in the second sentence. The transition is separated from the rest of the sentence by commas. And so a transition word can go in the beginning of the sentence, the middle of a sentence, and the end of a sentence. However, whenever you have a transition word at the end of a sentence, that's very rare and very formal English and very British English. Most of the time in American English, the transition word goes either at the beginning of the sentence or the middle of the sentence, okay? And I think it's with Shakespeare and very rare cases does the transition word go at the end of the sentence, okay? It's kind of rare. And so compare a transition. Compare a transition therefore has several possible patterns within the second sentence. A conjunction has only one possible position between two sentences. So that's the difference between a transition word and a coordinating conjunction. Coordinating conjunction is always in between, in the middle of two sentences. But a transition word is a lot more flexible. A transition word can go in the beginning, the middle, and the end. And how is this? Well, anyway, that's why it's known as a conjunctive adverb, because adverbs can also go at the beginning, the middle, and the end of a sentence, just like an adverb. That's what it's like. And so adverb clause. Because it was cold, she wore a coat. And so here, add capital letters if necessary. That's good. So here, because it was cold, comma, she wore a coat. Nah, nothing. She wore a coat because it was cold. So here we have to put in a comma because we always use a comma when the dependent clause is at the beginning of the sentence. Then when the dependent clause is at the end of the sentence, we don't need a comma. Because of the cold weather, she wore a coat. So when you have the prepositional phrase at the beginning of the sentence, you have to have a comma. And then when the prepositional phrase is at the end of the sentence, we don't need a comma. The weather was cold, therefore she wore a coat. Now transition words have many different ways in which you can use punctuation. So here, the weather was cold, semicolon, therefore, comma, she wore a coat. The weather was cold, period. And then here you would have capital letters. She, therefore, comma, comma, wore a coat. The weather was cold, the weather was cold, therefore, she wore a coat. Conjunction. The weather was cold, comma, so she wore a coat. So you put the comma before the so. Summary of patterns and punctuation. Because it was hot, we went swimming. We went swimming because it was hot. So here you have an adverb phrase. An adverb phrase may precede or follow an independent clause. A comma is used if the adverb phrase comes first. So here you have the adverb clause, not the phrase. An adverb clause may precede or follow an independent clause. A comma is used if the adverb clause comes first. So if the adverb clause comes first, we have a comma. If the adverb clause comes second, no comma. Because of the hot weather, we went swimming. We went swimming because of the hot weather. A preposition is followed by a noun object, not by the subject and verb. A comma is usually used if the prepositional phrase precedes the subject and verb. So here, if the prepositional phrase is at the beginning of the sentence and it's before the subject and the verb, then the prepositional phrase has a comma. If the prepositional phrase comes after the subject and verb at the end of the sentence, then you have no comma. And then a transition, here you have transition words. A transition is used with the second sentence of a pair. It shows the relationship of the second idea to the first idea. A transition is movable within the second sentence. A period is used between the two independent clauses. A comma may not be used to separate the clauses. Commas are usually used to set the transition off from the rest of the sentence. So it was hot, period. Therefore, comma, we went swimming. It was hot, we therefore went swimming. Notice the two commas. When the transition word is in the middle of the sentence, you have two commas. If it's at the beginning of the sentence, it has one comma, and then notice if it's at the end of the sentence, it has a comma. It was hot, so we went swimming. Here you have a coordinating conjunction, and you always have a comma before a coordinating conjunction. We postponed our trip. The weather was bad. So there are many different ways in which you can combine those two sentences. We postponed our trip. And then therefore, comma, so period, therefore, comma, the weather was bad. Since we postponed our trip, since the weather was bad, we postponed our trip. Or, since the weather was bad, comma, we postponed our trip. We postponed our trip, so the weather was bad, so we postponed our trip. Okay, and then you got a comma. Because of the bad weather, comma, we postponed our trip. The weather was bad, consequently, we postponed our trip. And then you have a period, then consequently, and then comma. Due to the fact that the weather was bad, comma, we postponed our trip. So yeah, this is all very fun to do because here you get to practice all of the patterns and punctuations from this. So if the dependent clause is in the beginning of the sentence, you have a comma. If the dependent clause is at the end of the sentence, no comma. If the preposition is at the beginning of the sentence, a comma. If the prepositional phrase is at the end of the sentence, no comma. If you have a transition word, then you always have a comma to offset that transition word from the rest of the sentence. So if the transition word is at the beginning of the sentence, one comma. If the transition word is in the middle of the sentence, two commas. And if the transition word is at the end of the sentence, one comma. Then when you have a coordinating conjunction, you always have a comma before the coordinating conjunction. So it's all very simple. Other ways of expressing cause and effect is such that and so that. Because the weather was nice, we went to the zoo. It was such nice weather that we went to the zoo. The weather was so nice that we went to the zoo. Examples A, B, and C all have the same meaning. It was such good coffee that I had another cup. It was such a foggy day that we couldn't see the road. So such that encloses a modified noun, such plus adjective plus noun plus that. The coffee is so hot that I can't drink it. I'm so hungry that I could eat a horse. She speaks so fast that I can't understand her. He walked so quickly that I couldn't keep up with him. She made so many mistakes that she failed the exam. He had so few friends that he is already lonely. She has so much money that she can buy whatever she wants. He had so little trouble with the test that he left 20 minutes early. It was such a good book that I couldn't put it down. I was so hungry that I didn't wait for dinner to eat something. And so such, that, encloses a modified noun. Such plus adjective plus noun, that. Such, he was such a handsome man. That, I fainted. Okay, so that sort of thing. So that encloses an adjective or adverb. He walked so quickly that I couldn't keep up with him. Or he talked so quickly that, or he talked so in such a boring manner that I fell asleep. So that is used with many and few. She made so many mistakes that she failed the exam. And so I made so many mistakes on my grammar test that I failed the test. And so here you can use such, that, and so to express cause and effect. The tea was good. I think I'll have another cup. The tea is so good that I think I'll have another cup. This is such a good cup of tea that I think I'll have another cup. It was such an expensive car that we couldn't afford to buy it. The car was so expensive we couldn't afford to buy it. The weather was so hot you could fry an egg on the sidewalk. Oh, that's pretty true in New York. During the summer we had hot and humid weather. It was so uncomfortable just sitting in a chair doing nothing. I don't feel like going to work. We're having such beautiful weather. Ivan takes everything in life too seriously. He is unable to experience, Ivan takes everything so seriously that he is unable to experience the small joys in life. I've met so few people in the last few days, I can't possibly remember all their names. Or I met so many people, not so few, I met so many people in the last few days, I can't possibly remember all their names. Tommy ate so much candy, he got a stomachache. Oh, that's like when I was young. I ate so much fudge that my face totally broke out. So you can use so much and such to have cause and effect. It took us only 10 minutes to get there. There was so little traffic that it only took us 10 minutes to get there. So that sort of thing. So you can have cause and effect with so, he is so handsome that I fainted. And he was so short that I laughed. Especially, he was an actor. And in his movies, I won't say which actor it is, in his movies he looks so tall that all the girls would go, wow. And then in person, he's so short that everybody laughed. So I won't say which actor this is, so it's not important. But you can use so that or such in order to have cause and effect. Expressing purpose using so that. I turned off the TV in order to enable my roommate to study in peace and quiet. I turned off the TV so that my roommate could study in peace and quiet. Means the same thing. I'm going to cash a check so that I can buy my textbook. I cashed a check so that I could buy my textbook. I'll take my umbrella so that I won't get wet. I'll take my umbrella so that I don't get wet. Yesterday I took my umbrella so that I wouldn't get wet. And so in order to express purpose, you would use in order to or so that. And it has the same meaning here. In A and B, same meaning. So that is often used instead of in order to when the idea of ability is being expressed. Can is used in the adverb clause for a present or future meaning. In C, to that I can buy in order to be able to buy. Could is used after so that in past sentences. I cashed a check so that I could buy my textbooks. And in case you don't know, could is the past tense of can. So here you have to have verb tense consistency. If you have present tense, I'm going to cash a check, then your verb also has to be present tense so that I can buy my textbooks. If you have past tense, then your verb has to be in the past tense to have verb tense consistency. So I cashed a check so that I could buy my textbooks. I'll take my umbrella so that I won't get wet. So here you have future tense and future tense. Future tense. I'll take my umbrella so that I don't get wet. So in E, so that I won't get wet, in order to make sure that I won't get wet, and it is sometimes possible to use the simple present so that in place of will after that expresses a future meaning. So yesterday I took my umbrella so that I wouldn't get wet. Okay, so wouldn't is the past tense of will. So therefore, if I have the past verb, yesterday I took my umbrella, then you have to have verb tense consistency, and would is the past tense of will. So therefore, everything has to match. Please turn the radio down so that I can get some sleep. My wife turned down the radio. I wanted to be able to get to sleep. So my wife turned down the radio so that I could get to sleep. Put the milk in the refrigerator. We want to make sure it won't spoil. Put the milk in the refrigerator so that it won't or doesn't spoil. I put the milk in the refrigerator. I wanted to make sure it didn't spoil. I put the milk in the refrigerator so that it wouldn't spoil. Showing contrast or unexpected results. All these sentences have the same meaning. The idea of cold weather is contrasted with the idea of going swimming. Usually if the weather is cold, one does not go swimming. So going swimming in cold weather is an unexpected result. It is surprising that the speaker would go swimming in cold weather. Even though the weather was cold, I went swimming. Although the weather was cold, I went swimming. Though it was cold, I went swimming. And so all of these contrasts are all different ways of saying but. It was cold, but I went swimming anyway. So if in your writing you use but all the time, then try using more transition words of contrast and try using more adverb clauses of contrast. So these are known as the adverb clauses of contrast. It was cold, but I still went swimming. It was cold, yet I still went swimming. They're all different ways of saying but. And then here, with the adverb clauses, you have a complex sentence. Here with the conjunctions, you have a compound sentence. And with transition words, you have a compound sentence. And with prepositions, you have a simple sentence. And so if you want more information on that, you can watch my week 8 instructor session. I think I go over that quite a bit. But all of these mean but. It was cold. Nevertheless, I went swimming. It was cold. Nonetheless, I went swimming. It was cold. However, I still went swimming. I went swimming despite the cold weather. I went swimming in spite of the cold weather. I went swimming despite the fact that the weather was cold. And I went swimming in spite of the fact that weather was cold. So all of these are all different ways of saying but. That's all you got to remember. Showing direct. So here are even more ways in which to use but. Mary is rich while John is poor. John is poor while Mary is rich. Mary is rich whereas John is poor. Whereas Mary is rich, John is poor. So you could just as well say Mary is rich, but John is poor. John is poor, but Mary is. So just a lot of ways to say but. And when you have an adverb clause, that is a complex sentence. Why is it important to know what kind of sentence it is? Because different kinds of sentence structures have different punctuation rules. That's why. So if you know that you have a complex sentence, then you know that when the dependent clause is at the beginning of the sentence, you have to have a comma. And then when the dependent clause is at the end of the sentence, no comma. So that's why it's important to note that adverb clauses go with complex sentences, and then conjunctions, okay, that goes with compound sentences. That means that whenever you have fanboys, you have to have a comma before the fanboys. For, and, but, or, nor, so, yet. Transitions also link compound sentences together. And so therefore, it would have Mary is rich, comma, or semicolon, and then however, and then comma. You always put a comma after a transition word. That is a very common essay mistake I see over and over again. So every time you use a transition word, you always have to use a comma after the transition word. And so all of these, while, whereas, but, however, and on the other hand, are all different ways of saying but in complex sentences, compound sentences, and simple sentences. Expressing conditions using otherwise or else. So these are all different ways of saying if. If I don't eat breakfast, I get hungry. You'll be late if you don't hurry. You'll get wet unless you take your umbrella. So in both of these cases, A, B, and C, if and unless are conditions that produce certain results. I always eat breakfast, otherwise I get hungry during class. You'd better hurry, otherwise you'll be late. Take your umbrella, otherwise you'll get wet. So otherwise expresses the idea of if the opposite is true, then there will be a certain result. So otherwise, if I don't eat breakfast. I always eat breakfast or else I get hungry during class. You'd better hurry or else you'll be late. Take your umbrella or else you'll get wet. So or and otherwise and if. So these are all different ways of saying if, expressing conditions. So that way in your essay, you don't keep saying if. So you have different ways of expressing if. So here's a summary of connectives: cause and effect, contrast, and condition. And so cause and effect, those are all pretty much different ways of saying because. Contrast, these are all different ways of saying but. And condition, all different ways of saying if. And now I'm at the very last chapter of this book, of the Azar book. And I can't stop but recommend, I highly recommend that if you are an ELL learner or an ESL student and English is your second language, I highly recommend that you buy the Betty Azar book so that you could study your grammar. It also comes, you could also buy a workbook, and you could also buy an answer key. So that way you can study by yourself, and then if you have a tutoring center that you can go to and you don't understand a couple of the answers, then you can go ask a tutor, why was this answer wrong? Why did I get that wrong? Or you could ask your English teacher, if you're lucky enough to have an English teacher who can, or ESL teacher who can answer the question, who can help you with your workbook and your grammar. So I do hope, so far we're in chapter 19 out of 20, and I hope that so far my videos are helping you learn English grammar. So next time I'm going to be doing the very last video, chapter 20 of the Azar book. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me anytime.